I remember the exact moment my world ended. It was a Thursday evening in October, the kind where autumn had finally decided to show up properly, crisp air, orange leaves catching the last of the light through the restaurant window. I was wearing the blue shirt Elena had picked out for me last Christmas, the one she always said made my eyes look brighter. I'd even gotten a haircut that afternoon. I wanted everything to be perfect because I was going to propose that night. I had the ring in my jacket pocket. I could feel it there, a small square weight against my ribs, every time I took a breath. The restaurant was Marchetti's, the Italian place on 5th where we'd had our first real date 3 years ago. I'd called ahead and asked them to set a single white rose on the table. I'd written and rewritten what I was going to say roughly 40 times in the notes app on my phone. I was nervous in the way that only feels good, that carbonated, electric nervousness of a man who is about to step into the best chapter of his life. I arrived 7 minutes early and sat down and ordered still water and waited. And then Elena walked in. She looked beautiful. She always did. Dark hair, that particular way she carried herself like the room was already aware of her. She was smiling. I stood up because I always stood up when she came to the table, a habit her father had once complimented me on, which had meant more to me than I'd admitted. She wasn't alone. The man behind her was tall. Maybe 30, clean-shaven, wearing a jacket that probably cost twice what I made in a week. He had his hand at the small of her back in the particular, proprietary way of a man who considers that space his. He was looking around the restaurant with the comfortable ease of someone who'd eaten in places like this his whole life. I watched Elena's face as she saw me, and what I saw there was not guilt. It was something more complicated than guilt. It was the expression of a woman who has been caught mid-sentence in a lie she'd forgotten she was telling. She stopped about 4 feet from the table. The man stopped with her. "John," she said. "Just my name. Nothing after it." "Hey," I said, because my brain had stopped producing language beyond the single syllable. There was a pause that lasted approximately 1 geological era. And then she said, "This is Daniel." Another pause, shorter but more loaded, "my fiancé." I heard the word. I understood the word. My brain processed the word correctly and delivered its meaning without error. But for about 4 seconds, my body did not respond to any of this information, because my body was still in the reality I'd been living in 60 seconds ago, when the ring was in my pocket and I was nervous in the good way and everything was about to get better. Then it hit. Not sadness. Not yet. First came the specific, nauseating lurch of complete disorientation, like missing a step in the dark. Then something that started in my chest and spread outward, something that tightened my jaw and my hands simultaneously. Daniel extended his hand to shake mine. He had no idea. I could see that immediately, the man had no idea who I was. To him, I was just some guy his fiancée apparently knew, standing at a table in a restaurant, holding a glass of still water. I did not shake his hand. I looked at Elena. Only at Elena. "His fiancée," I repeated. "John, his name is Daniel," I said. My voice was very quiet and very flat. "I donated a kidney to his brother 8 months ago. To save his life. Because you asked me to. Because you told me he was the only family you had left and you couldn't lose him." I paused. "I want to make sure Daniel knows that. I want to make sure he knows who I am." The color drained from Elena's face so completely and so fast it was almost impressive. Daniel's hand was still extended. He pulled it back now, slowly, looking between us. "Who is this?" he asked Elena. "Not me. Her." She said nothing. "I'm John," I said to him directly. "I was Elena's boyfriend for 3 years. I took 6 weeks off work, I went through surgery, I spent 4 months recovering from giving away an organ because Elena needed me to. Because she said it was an emergency. Because I loved her. I reached into my jacket pocket, took out the ring box, set it on the white tablecloth between the candle and the white rose. I came here tonight to propose." The restaurant had gone quiet around us in that radius of silence that forms when strangers sense they are witnessing something real. Elena said my name again, the way a person says a word when they're not sure it still applies. "Don't," I said. I picked up my jacket from the back of the chair. I left the ring on the table. I walked out of Marchetti's and I stood on the sidewalk in the October air and I breathed, slowly, deliberately, the way the doctor had taught me during my post-surgical recovery when the pain got ahead of me. I didn't cry on the sidewalk. I saved that for the drive home. Let me back up, because none of this makes sense without the 18 months that came before it. I met Elena Reyes at a work conference in Chicago. I was presenting a case study on supply chain logistics, not glamorous, I know, and she was in the audience taking notes with a fountain pen like it was 1952, and I noticed her before I even made it to the third slide. Afterward she asked me a question so sharp it made me scramble for an answer I should have had ready, and I embarrassed myself slightly, and she laughed, and that was it. That was the entire beginning. We dated long distance for 4 months before she relocated to Boston, where I lived. She moved into her own apartment 2 blocks from mine, and within 6 weeks she was at my place more nights than not, and within a year we had the kind of relationship that other couples look at and quietly measure themselves against. Or at least I thought we did. I was a good boyfriend. I want to say that plainly, not out of bitterness but because it's relevant. I wasn't perfect, but I was present and consistent, and I paid attention. I remembered things: her sister's birthday, the name of her college roommate's dog, the particular brand of tea she liked in the morning versus the evening. I showed up. When she was sick I brought soup. When she was stressed about work I listened and didn't offer solutions unless she asked for them, which she'd once told me most men couldn't manage. I was, by any reasonable measure, a good partner. I also, as it turns out, was a catastrophically poor judge of character. 11 months into the relationship, Elena got a phone call on a Sunday afternoon that changed her entire face. I was making lunch in her kitchen when I heard her voice drop, and I looked through the doorway and she had one hand pressed flat against the wall and her eyes were closed. I turned off the stove. Her brother, she told me afterward. Her younger brother, Ryan. He'd been quietly sick for 2 years, kidney disease, the progressive kind, and had finally been told he needed a transplant. He'd been on the waiting list for 18 months with no match. The living donor options in the family had been exhausted. Their mother had been ruled out due to her own health issues. Elena herself was a blood type mismatch. There was no one else. She didn't ask me. Not that day, not that week. She told me about it, carefully, factually, in the way of someone who needs to say a thing out loud but isn't asking for anything. I respected that for exactly 9 days, and then I sat down with her and I said, "Let them test me." She cried. The real kind, not the pretty kind. She said she couldn't ask me to do that. I said she wasn't asking, I was offering, and there was a difference. I said that if I were going to spend my life with her, and I said this plainly, because by that point I knew it, I was already part of this family, and family showed up. The testing took 6 weeks. Blood type, cross-match, compatibility panel, psychological evaluation, a consultation with the transplant team's independent advocate who sat across from me in a bare office and asked me 3 times in 3 different ways whether anyone was pressuring me to do this. No, I told her. No one was pressuring me. This was my decision. I was a match. The surgery was scheduled for a Tuesday in February. I remember very little of it, obviously, but I remember waking up in the recovery room with an extraordinary amount of pain in my left side and Elena's face being the first thing I focused on. She was holding my hand. She looked like she hadn't slept. She told me Ryan was out of surgery and doing well and the transplant team was optimistic. She kissed my hand. She said, "I don't have words for what you've done." I spent 4 days in the hospital. I spent 3 weeks barely able to move. I spent 4 months in a modified recovery during which I couldn't lift anything heavy, couldn't return to full-time work, had to attend follow-up appointments every 3 weeks and take medication and report any unusual symptoms immediately. My boss, and I'm grateful for this, worked with me on a reduced schedule. My savings took a hit. My body, fundamentally and permanently, was different than it had been before. Elena was there for most of it. She brought food, drove me to appointments, sat with me through the uncomfortable ones. She was attentive and warm and present, and I told myself this was the woman I was going to marry. I had been so certain. Here is what I did not know. Daniel was not Ryan's friend. Daniel was not Elena's colleague or neighbor or someone she'd met at a networking event. Daniel was a man Elena had been seeing, quietly and consistently, for approximately 4 months before I ever walked into that restaurant. She had met him at the fundraising gala her company hosted in the spring, the one I hadn't attended because my follow-up appointments that week had conflicted, and she'd said it was fine, not to worry. I did not know any of this on the Thursday night I walked into Marchetti's. I learned it in pieces, over the weeks that followed, from sources that included Elena herself, her best friend Claire who apparently had a conscience that overwhelmed her loyalty, and eventually Ryan, yes, Ryan, whose life I had literally saved and who, to his credit, called me when he found out and said, in a voice that made it clear he felt genuinely sick about it, "John, I didn't know. I swear to God I didn't know about him until last month. I would have told you." I believed Ryan. I still believe Ryan. He was not part of it. Elena was all of it. The night I walked out of the restaurant, I drove home, went inside, sat on my kitchen floor for a while, and then called my best friend, a man named Greg who had known me since college and who answered on the second ring despite it being nearly 10 o'clock on a Thursday. I told him what had happened. There was a long silence. "Say that again," he said. "The last part." She introduced him as her fiancé. "At the table you booked for the proposal." "Yes." Another silence. Greg was not a dramatic person. He processed things in long, careful beats, which was usually a quality I appreciated. "I'm coming over," he said. "You don't have to, I'm coming over." He was there in 20 minutes with a six-pack he'd clearly grabbed from somewhere on the way and an expression on his face that I'd never seen before, a specific, particular fury that had nothing to do with him personally and everything to do with the kind of friend he was. We sat in my kitchen until 2 in the morning. I talked. He listened. He asked questions that helped me reconstruct the timeline. When had I last seen her? What had she said? What had the last 3 months looked like in retrospect? He was building the picture with me, the same way you'd work out the logic of a puzzle after someone tells you the answer and you have to reverse engineer where all the pieces actually were. By midnight we had a rough shape of it. She'd started seeing Daniel while I was still in recovery. She'd maintained the relationship with me, attentively, warmly, convincingly, for 8 months while doing so. She had accepted a proposal from him, apparently, at some point in the last 6 weeks, and had not told me. Had not ended things with me. Had just continued. "She was keeping you as a fallback," Greg said, not cruelly, just factually. "Or she didn't know how to tell me," I said, and then hated myself for saying it, because I was still, even then, generating excuses on her behalf. Greg looked at me steadily. "You gave the woman a kidney, John." I didn't say anything. "You gave her a kidney," he repeated. "While she was dating someone else." The specific weight of that settled over me slowly, like temperature dropping. I had given her a kidney. Not a metaphorical thing, not an emotional sacrifice. I had lain on a surgical table and allowed a surgeon to remove an organ from my body, permanently, and I had done it for her, at her request, and she had been seeing Daniel for 4 months at the time of the surgery. She had stood in my recovery room, holding my hand, while she was seeing another man. She had said, "I don't have words for what you've done," while seeing another man. She had attended 12 follow-up appointments with me, driven me to 3 early morning blood draws, held my hand through the one appointment where the results came back abnormal and we spent 40 minutes terrified before they rechecked and found the error. She had done all of that while seeing another man. The sadness, when it arrived completely. It was not the clean, dramatic kind. It was the bewildering kind, the kind that makes you question not just the person but your own perception, your own judgment, your own grip on reality. Had I missed signs? Surely I must have missed signs. What kind of man misses the signs for 8 months? I stayed in that kitchen with Greg until 2 a.m. and then I slept, badly, and woke up at 5 with that specific post-catastrophe clarity that follows the first night of grief, the sense of moving through a world that is exactly the same as yesterday's world but completely, irreparably different. I lay in bed and stared at the ceiling and made a decision. I was not going to beg. I was not going to call her and ask her to explain or take me back or choose me. I was not going to perform sadness in front of her. I was not going to cry where she could see me. I was going to be very, very precise. The calls started that weekend. Elena called 4 times on Friday, twice on Saturday, once on Sunday. I did not answer. She texted, long ones, the kind that suggested she'd drafted and revised them, and I read them without responding. She said she was sorry. She said things had gotten complicated. She said she'd wanted to tell me but hadn't known how. She said Daniel had proposed and she'd been too scared to say no and too scared to tell me and she'd made terrible decisions and she knew that. She said I deserved better. That last one was accurate. I did not respond to any of it. On Monday I called a lawyer named Patricia, who was the sister of a college friend and who specialized in civil litigation. I explained the situation, the donation, the relationship, the concealment, and asked whether any legal avenue existed. Patricia was quiet for a moment. "It's complicated," she said carefully, "because you can't legally undo a donation. And relationships, as awful as this was, don't typically create a legally enforceable obligation. However," and here her voice shifted slightly, "if she made explicit representations to you that impacted your decision to donate, and you can document those representations, there may be grounds for a civil action related to fraud or emotional distress. It's not guaranteed, but it's worth building a file." I built a file. Greg helped. Greg was, as it turned out, almost frighteningly good at gathering information when he was angry on someone else's behalf. Within 2 weeks we had screenshots of the messages Elena had sent me during the donation process that constituted clear emotional representations about our relationship and future, a documented timeline establishing that Daniel and Elena had been in contact prior to my surgery, and confirmation from Claire, Elena's friend, who by this point had clearly made her choice about whose side she was on, that Elena had told her about Daniel during my recovery period and asked her to keep it quiet. Claire had kept it quiet for 8 months. She had not kept it quiet after seeing my face at the restaurant. She showed up at my apartment on a Saturday morning, 9 days after the dinner, and told me everything she knew. She looked like she hadn't slept well in over a week. I should have said something sooner, she said. I told myself it wasn't my place and that she'd figure it out. I was a coward. I didn't tell her she was right, but I also didn't tell her she was wrong. I thanked her for coming. I asked her to write down everything she'd told me, dates and details, and she did, right there at my kitchen table, filling 3 pages in careful handwriting. I added it to the file. Meanwhile, I had other work to do. Elena's employer was a public relations firm, one of the larger ones in Boston, well regarded, with a client roster that included several hospitals and healthcare organizations. Interesting, I thought, for a company whose senior account manager had helped orchestrate a situation in which a man had undergone unnecessary major surgery while being deceived. I was not suggesting this to their HR department yet. I was merely noting it. Daniel worked in real estate development. He had a LinkedIn profile that was thorough and professional and connected to approximately 400 people in his industry. I had a profile that was considerably more modest, but I had Greg, who had once worked in finance and still maintained a broad professional network, and I had time, and I had the particular cold clarity of a man who has moved fully out of grief and into purpose. I started small. There was a healthcare professionals networking event in late November that I knew Elena's firm had a presence at. They handled communications for 2 of the hospital systems in the city and attended it every year. I reached out to a contact I had from a previous job, a woman named Brenda who worked in hospital administration and sat on the event's advisory board. I had a conversation with Brenda that I described as sharing some information I thought the healthcare community might find relevant about a PR firm currently handling communications for medical institutions. I did not lie. I told Brenda exactly what had happened. I brought documentation. I let her draw her own conclusions about whether a firm whose senior employee had engaged in documented emotional fraud connected to a medical procedure should be handling the reputational communications for healthcare institutions. Brenda was a thoughtful woman. She said she'd look into it. Then I moved to Daniel. Daniel, I had learned from Greg's reconnaissance, was in the middle of a significant commercial development project, the kind that required a patchwork of investors and community approvals and the general goodwill of people who didn't yet know him well but were deciding whether to trust him. He was also, it emerged, not the completely innocent party I'd initially assumed. Claire had told me that Daniel knew Elena was in a relationship when they started seeing each other. He hadn't known about the kidney donation. Elena had apparently kept that detail from him, but he'd known about me. He'd chosen to proceed anyway. I felt that was relevant information for his professional contacts to have access to. I did not call his investors directly. What I did was post, carefully and factually, on a local business community forum that I'd been a member of for years, a detailed account of my experience. I used full names. I included the timeline. I attached documentation. I stated clearly that I was not making allegations of legal wrongdoing. I was simply sharing a factual account of what had happened to me, as I was entitled to do, so that people who might be making decisions about whom to trust could have complete information. The post was shared 47 times in the first week. I want to be honest about the next part, because I am not proud of all of it, even though I don't regret most of it. Ryan called me 3 weeks after the dinner. I almost didn't answer. The number was Elena's family's original landline, a number I'd memorized over 3 years of relationship, and then I thought about Ryan specifically and picked up. John. His voice was rough. I need you to know that I didn't know about Daniel. I didn't know he existed until my sister told me she was engaged, he stopped. Which was 2 weeks before the dinner at the restaurant. I thought she'd ended it with you. She told me, he stopped again. She told me you two had mutually agreed to take space from each other. She told you we'd broken up. Yes. And then she told me she'd met someone. I had no reason not to believe her. I sat with this. I know, Ryan. I should have called you. When she told me she was engaged, something felt off and I should have called you directly to check. I didn't because I thought it wasn't my place and his voice cracked slightly. I'm alive because of you. I want you to know that I know that. That I know what you gave up. You don't owe me anything, I said, and I meant it. What happened between your sister and me isn't your debt. I know. I just needed you to hear me say it. We talked for 40 minutes. By the end of it I had a clear picture of everything Elena had told her family, the lie about the mutual separation, the curated version of Daniel, the complete erasure of my existence from the narrative she'd constructed. She had managed 2 separate realities simultaneously and with considerable skill, and the effort she'd put into it was, in a grotesque way, impressive. Ryan asked, before we hung up, whether I was okay. Not yet, I said. Working on it. I'd like to buy you dinner sometime. If you'd let me. Yeah, I said. Let's do that. He and I have had dinner 3 times since. Ryan is a good man. He carries what his sister did with a quiet shame that isn't his to bear, and I've told him so. He became, unexpectedly, a genuine friend, the kind of connection that emerges from wreckage and turns out to be one of the few things worth keeping. By December, 6 weeks after the restaurant, the professional consequences had begun to materialize. Elena's firm lost one of its hospital clients. I don't know for certain that my conversation with Brenda was the direct cause. These things are rarely traceable to a single point. But the timing was notable, and a mutual contact mentioned that there had been some concerns raised about internal ethics during the review process. Elena was not fired. But she was, I learned through Claire, placed on a performance review plan for the first time in her career, and several of the accounts she managed were reassigned. She was furious, apparently. She blamed me. I considered that accurate. Daniel's development project hit a more concrete obstacle. 2 of his smaller investors withdrew, not publicly, not dramatically, just quietly, as investors sometimes do when they've reconsidered their confidence in the person leading a project. His timeline slipped by 4 months. The local business forum post was specifically mentioned, I was told secondhand, in one of the withdrawal conversations. He called me, actually. Once. In late November. I answered, because I wanted to hear what he had to say. He said he thought I was being vindictive and that whatever had happened between Elena and me was not his fault and that I was damaging innocent people. I said, you knew she was in a relationship when you started seeing her. Silence. I have the documentation, I said. I have Claire's written account. You weren't innocent. You made choices. More silence. I haven't lied about anything, I continued. I've shared factual information with people who were in the process of making decisions about who to trust. If those facts are damaging to you, that's the fact's fault, not mine. He hung up. Elena sent me one final message in December, a long one that moved through several emotional registers: anger, blame, self-justification, and eventually something that might have been genuine remorse, though by then I couldn't tell the difference. She said I had no right to affect her career. She said she understood I was hurt but that I was taking it too far. She said she hoped eventually I could forgive her. I read it once. I didn't respond. I added it to the file. Patricia, the lawyer, filed a civil claim in January. It was a long shot, she was clear about that, and it was not primarily about money, though the medical and professional costs I'd incurred were documented in full. It was about creating a formal record. About establishing, in a context that required evidence and truth-telling, exactly what had occurred. Elena's attorney attempted to have it dismissed. The judge declined to dismiss it at the initial hearing, which was something. The case was still pending in the spring when things started to change. I started seeing a therapist in November. His name was Dr. Carl Webb, a quiet man in his late 50s with an office full of plants and the steady, unhurried manner of someone who has spent decades listening to people work through their worst experiences. I did not want to go. Greg made me an appointment and told me, with the bluntness that was his primary love language, that I was either going to see a professional or I was going to become someone he didn't recognize, and he'd prefer not to watch that happen. I went. Carl was useful in ways I hadn't anticipated. He wasn't particularly interested in Elena. He had a way of redirecting conversations that started heading toward obsessive territory that was subtle enough to feel like my own idea. What he was interested in was the question I was most avoiding: why had I not seen it? You saw what you wanted to see, he said, in our 3rd session. That's not stupidity. That's what trust looks like from the inside. I gave her a kidney, I said. I need to understand how I missed that she was deceiving me. She was very careful not to let you see it, he said. That's a reflection of her character, not your perception. It took several months before that settled into something I actually believed rather than just understood intellectually. But it settled eventually. I also went back to the gym in December, mainly because Carl suggested exercise and I was out of other ideas for managing the specific physical restlessness that grief generates. I'd been active before the surgery and had spent a year pulling back, cautiously, the way the recovery protocol required. Now I pushed, carefully, within the boundaries the transplant team had cleared for me. By February I was stronger than I'd been before the donation. By March I looked like a different version of myself, not dramatically, not in the movie makeover sense, but in the way that consistent effort and genuine sleep and the end of chronic, unacknowledged stress will quietly recompose a person from the outside in. My work improved. I'd been operating at something like 80% capacity for over a year, not obviously, not in any way my employer would have flagged, but I knew it. The mental bandwidth Elena and the donation and the recovery had occupied was now available for other things. I completed a project in March that earned me a commendation from the division director, the first formal recognition I'd received in 18 months. I was offered a lead role on an initiative that came with a title adjustment and a salary increase that made Greg physically pump his fist when I told him. I didn't feel triumphant about these things, exactly. I felt steady. Like a gyroscope that had been knocked sideways and was gradually returning to true. Spring arrived. April. Then May. Ryan and I had dinner on a Thursday, the first week of May, at a barbecue place he liked in Cambridge. He looked well, better than he had the first time I'd seen him after the transplant, when his color had been wrong and he'd moved carefully, like a man aware of the machinery inside him. Now he looked like a person, fully and simply. I was glad about that in a way that surprised me. The gladness was clean, uncomplicated, without the resentment I might have expected given everything. He told me, over ribs and cornbread, that Elena and Daniel had postponed the wedding. Indefinitely. I asked. That's the word she used. There were, he paused, choosing words, some things that came out. That he apparently hadn't told her before they got engaged. What kind of things? Ryan was quiet for a moment. That he'd known about you when they started seeing each other. And that there were some business difficulties that she only found out about fully in March. He shook his head. She found out he'd had a partner in a previous development deal who had sued him. 2 years ago. He'd never mentioned it. I absorbed this. I did not feel satisfaction, exactly. It was more neutral than that, the sensation of watching a system produce its natural consequences. She came to me, Ryan added. Last month. She wanted to talk about you. About what she'd done. I waited. She said she'd been wrong. Not just about the way she handled it, about who she was and what she'd chosen. She said, he glanced at me, she said the worst thing she'd ever realized was that when she was standing in that hospital while you were in surgery, she already knew she was seeing Daniel. And she watched you come out of that operating room and told herself she'd figure it out later. She figured it out later, I said. She did. He met my eyes. She asked me to tell you she was sorry. I told her you didn't need her apology delivered secondhand. I told her if she had something to say to you, she needed to say it herself. When did you tell her that? 3 weeks ago. I nodded. I took a long drink of water. Outside the restaurant, a late afternoon in May, the city moved past the windows with its ordinary, indifferent beauty. All right, I said. She called in June. I saw the number and I sat with the ringing phone in my hand for 3 full rings before I answered. John. Her voice was different than I remembered, quieter, without the particular assurance she'd always carried. Elena. A pause. I wasn't going to call. I decided not to, probably 15 times. And then, she stopped. I just needed to say it to you. Not in a text. I needed you to actually hear me. All right. I'm sorry. She said it plainly, without prelude or architecture. Not the kind of sorry that's looking for something back. Just, I'm sorry for what I did to you. For all of it. For letting you go into surgery while I was lying to you. For standing in that hospital and choosing to keep lying instead of telling you the truth. For not being the person you thought I was. I said nothing. The line was quiet for long enough that she probably thought I'd hung up. I don't have an explanation that makes it okay, she continued. I've tried to construct one and I can't. I was scared and I was selfish and I made choices that hurt you in ways that I didn't let myself look at because looking at them would have required me to actually face what I was doing. And by the time I was fully looking at it, I'd been doing it for so long that stopping felt impossible. It wasn't impossible, I said. It was just costly. And you chose not to pay that cost. Silence. Yes, she said. That's exactly right. Another long pause. I'm not going to tell you I forgive you right now, I said. I don't know if I do. I know that you didn't destroy me. I know I'm not sitting in a ruin. I considered the word, I'm fine, Elena. I'm more than fine. And I want you to hear that not as a dig, but as information. Whatever you took from me when you made those decisions, it wasn't permanent. I built something better with what I had left. She was quiet for a moment. I thought I could hear her breathing. I'm glad, she said. And she sounded like she meant it, not performatively, not theatrically, just plainly. I'm genuinely glad. Okay, I said. Okay, she said. There was a beat. Goodbye, John. Goodbye. I hung up. I sat in my apartment in the June evening, with the windows open and the sounds of the city coming in, traffic, someone playing music below, the ordinary, beautiful noise of a world that had continued without permission or pause, and I felt something happen in my chest. Not the return of love. Not forgiveness, necessarily, not yet. Something quieter. The loosening of a thing I'd been holding tightly without realizing it. I picked up my phone and texted Greg, dinner this week. He replied in approximately 4 seconds, Thursday. I'll pick the place. You owe me like 30 dinners. I laughed. Genuinely, fully, the kind of laugh that uses your whole chest. I hadn't laughed like that in longer than I could precisely track. The civil case settled in July. Not for a life-changing amount, but enough to cover the full cost of the medical leave and the salary reduction and the copays and the follow-up care and a portion of what Patricia estimated as general damages. Elena's attorneys had finally calculated that defending it was costlier and more reputationally damaging than settling quietly, which was, in its way, its own kind of acknowledgement. I donated 15% of the settlement to the transplant foundation at the hospital where the surgery had been performed. The irony of this did not escape me. Patricia called when it was finalized and said, in the tone of someone who has seen many outcomes and is noting that this one was better than most, "You handled this well, John." Not everyone does. I had help, I said, which was true. There is one more thing to tell, and I want to tell it without overstating it. I met a woman named Diane in August, at a friend's backyard birthday party, a low-key afternoon thing, the kind where people stand around with drinks and the conversation drifts. She was a friend of a friend, a physical therapist, with a dry sense of humor and the particular quality of person who asks follow-up questions because they're actually interested in the answer, not because they're waiting for their turn to talk. We talked for 2 hours at that party. I noticed I was comfortable in a way I hadn't expected to be, not performing comfort, just actually experiencing it. She noticed I was guarded in certain ways and didn't push, just worked around it with the patient ease of someone accustomed to people who were healing from something. I asked for her number at the end of the night. She gave it to me without making me feel like it was a decision she was deliberating. We had coffee the following week, dinner the week after. We took it slowly, by mutual agreement, and the slowness felt right rather than cautious. I told her about Elena on our 4th date. The whole thing, donation, betrayal, the restaurant, the ring on the table. She listened to all of it without interrupting and then sat quietly for a moment with her coffee cup in both hands. How long ago was the surgery? She asked. About 14 months. She nodded. And how are you now? Physically. Not the question I'd expected. Good. They're happy with the function of the remaining kidney. I get regular monitoring. I'm cleared to live normally. Okay, she said. Not as dismissal, as receipt of information. That's all you want to ask? I said. She looked at me. I'll probably have more questions later. For right now, I just wanted to make sure you were okay. The rest is, she tilted her head, yours. You don't have to give it to me until you want to. That was Diane. That was the nature of her. She understood the difference between information she was entitled to and information I was ready to share, and she waited patiently at the border between those things. We had been dating for 3 months when she met Greg, who shook her hand and then caught my eye across the room with an expression that, in 17 years of friendship, I'd learned to read as yes, this one is good. It was that simple. It was also, after everything, that enormous. I think about that October evening sometimes. Not obsessively, not in the way I used to, in the early months, when it would arrive without warning and require active mental work to set aside. Now when it comes quietly, like a photograph surfacing, the restaurant, the candlelight, the white rose, Elena's face, the word fiancé, the ring box I set on the table and never picked up. I left the ring that night. I didn't go back for it. I assume Marchetti's kept it, or the staff gave it away, or it's sitting in a lost and found drawer somewhere. It doesn't matter. It was for a version of the future that didn't exist, and you can't return ring boxes to futures. What I know now, a year removed from that evening, is this: I am not the story of what was done to me. The surgery did not break me. The betrayal did not break me. I gave away something permanent in good faith, and the good faith was used against me, and that is a true and terrible thing, and it is also not the final chapter. The final chapter is the apartment with better light that I moved into in September. It's the promotion with a title I'm still not entirely used to seeing on my email signature. It's Ryan texting me memes about basketball teams we've decided to mutually root for, despite neither of us having particular allegiances. It's Greg across a dinner table, still occasionally shaking his head about the ring box, still fundamentally, stubbornly, gratefully present. It's Diane, who sat with me on my couch one Sunday in November, my arm around her, both of us reading, the specific quiet of two people who have no need to fill silence because the silence is already full, and I thought, this is what I was trying to get to. Not this exactly, not this couch or this woman specifically, but this quality of thing. This reality. I thought I was building it with Elena. I was wrong about that. But I wasn't wrong about the destination. I hear, occasionally, through the channels by which information still flows despite efforts to contain it, that Elena is adjusting. That the engagement with Daniel ended formally in August. That she is, by most accounts, less certain of herself than she used to be, which is not, I hope, permanent, because certainty without accuracy is a dangerous thing, and learning to trade it for something more honest is hard, painful, necessary work. I wish her the work. I wish her the honesty. I don't wish her harm. The kidney is doing fine, as far as Ryan and his doctors can tell. It is inside a man who called me in the middle of the night once, 3 months post-transplant, because he'd had a nightmare about not waking up and needed to talk to someone, and I talked to him until 2 a.m., and by the end we were laughing about something absurd, I can't remember what. It is inside a man who is, by all medical and personal measures, alive in a way he would not otherwise have been. I gave that. It cost me. It was still the right thing. Not because Elena deserved my good faith. She didn't, not the way she spent it. But because Ryan deserved to live, and because I was someone who could help, and because the version of myself who would have refused to help in order to protect against the possibility of being hurt is not someone I want to be. I am not that careful. I have learned, and I have drawn better lines, and I hold people to clearer account now, and I will not be so easily led past my own judgment again. But I am not that careful. I still believe in showing up. I just show up now with my eyes open. That feels right. That feels like the version of myself I've been working toward, not hardened, not diminished, not made cautious and closed by what happened, but genuinely, structurally better. Clearer. More myself than I was before, which is the strange and specific reward that sometimes emerges from surviving the things that were supposed to defeat you. I won't pretend the October night at Marchetti's didn't cost me something I can't get back. But here is what I know, completely and without any remaining doubt: I got out cheap.